The clock on the wall of the abandoned grocery store had stopped at 3:47 p.m. Mireille noticed because every clock she'd encountered in the past 6 months had frozen at that exact moment. Not approximately. Not close. Precisely 3:47 p.m., as if the entire world had agreed to cease measuring time at that instant. She pressed her palm against the dusty glass, leaving a perfect handprint, and wondered if anyone else had noticed this impossible detail. In her heart, she already knew the answer. She was the only one who remembered what time had meant before it stopped. The silence outside was absolute. No bird sang. No wind rustled through the skeletal trees. Even the infected, those hollow-eyed remnants of humanity, moved without sound, their footsteps somehow muted, their mouths opening in screams that produced no noise. Mireille had named this new reality the Silent War, because that's what it felt like, a battle being waged in perfect, suffocating quiet, where the only sounds that remained were the ones inside her own head. She moved through the store with practiced efficiency, her boots somehow still making noise against the linoleum floor. That was another peculiarity she documented in the leather journal she carried. Her sounds remained. When she spoke, she could hear her own voice. When she knocked over a can, it clattered. But everything else, the entire world beyond her own actions, existed in this terrible soundless void. The infected could walk right behind her, and she'd hear nothing. She'd learned to check reflective surfaces obsessively. The shelves were mostly bare, but Mireille had developed an eye for overlooked resources. She found a can of peaches wedged behind a toppled display, 3 bottles of water that had rolled under a counter, and a packet of beef jerky that had been trampled but not punctured. She added them to her backpack with the reverence of a collector finding rare gems. Food wasn't scarce yet, not really, but she'd learned that, not yet, could become, too late, faster than the heart could break. Through the grimy window, she could see them, 7 infected standing in the parking lot, perfectly motionless. They'd been in those exact positions when she'd entered the store 40 minutes ago. This was another rule of the new world. The infected didn't move unless someone who was still human came within their sight line. They existed in a state of perpetual pause, like video game characters waiting to be activated. Once they saw you, though, they pursued with relentless, silent determination. Mireille had watched them run without their feet making contact sounds. She'd seen them tear through chain-link fences without the metal protesting. The physics of sound had simply stopped applying to everything except her. She needed to leave before sunset. The darkness brought complications. The infected could navigate the lightless world perfectly, while Mireille still needed to see where she was going. She'd learned this lesson the hard way in the early days, back when she'd still believed someone might come to explain what had happened. Back when she thought she might find others who remembered the before time, who could confirm that the world had once been filled with noise and chaos and beautiful, ordinary sound. Her destination was the library across town, where she'd been systematically working through the science section, searching for any explanation, any theory that might account for the impossible phenomenon she was experiencing. She'd read about temporal anomalies, auditory hallucinations, localized electromagnetic pulses, and quantum entanglement. None of it explained why time had stopped for the entire world except for her perception of it. None of it explained why she alone seemed to remember that yesterday had once meant something different from today. Mireille shouldered her backpack and prepared to run. The route was mapped in her mind, straight down Oakwood Avenue, cut through the collapsed coffee shop, vault over the hedge barrier, and sprint the final 100 yards to the library's side entrance. If she was fast enough, the infected wouldn't fully activate before she was out of their sight range. They'd return to their frozen states, waiting like terrible statues for the next living person to stumble into their awareness. She took a breath, counted to 3, and burst through the door into the silent world beyond. The infected turned toward her with that horrible, fluid synchronization that haunted her dreams. Their movements were smooth, not jerky or awkward like the zombies in old movies, but graceful in a way that made Mireille's skin crawl. She didn't look back. Looking back cost seconds, and seconds cost lives, even if hers seemed to be the only life still being lived in real time. Her feet pounded against the pavement, each footfall a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. The sound of her own breathing was deafening. She could hear her heartbeat hammering in her ears, the swish of her jacket, the jingle of supplies in her backpack. But behind her, she knew 7 infected were running full sprint, and they made no sound at all. It was like being chased by ghosts who could tear your throat out. Mireille rounded the corner at Oakwood Avenue and nearly collided with another frozen infected, a woman in a postal uniform who'd been caught mid-delivery, her hand still extended toward a mailbox. Mireille had seen her before, had documented her in the journal: postal worker, late 30s, blonde hair, wedding ring on left hand. She wondered if this woman had a family somewhere. If someone waited in a silent house for her to return home. The coffee shop loomed ahead, its front wall collapsed inward from some violent impact Mireille had never witnessed. She ducked through the opening, glass crunching under her boots, another sound that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet. Inside, the familiar smell of stale coffee and rot mixed together. There were 3 infected in here, but they were in the back room, and she knew from previous runs that if she stayed low and moved quickly, they wouldn't activate. She was halfway through when she saw something that made her stop completely. A man was sitting at one of the tables. Not an infected. Not frozen. A living man, drinking from a bottle of water, as casually as if the world hadn't ended 6 months ago. He looked up at her, and his eyes widened with recognition of another conscious being. "You can move," Mireille whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. She tried to speak to herself sometimes, to maintain the muscle memory of conversation, but it wasn't the same as speaking to another person. The man stood slowly, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. He was tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a scar running down his left cheek. His clothes were clean, impossibly clean for this new world, and he wore a watch that was still ticking. "My name is Casper," he said, and his voice sounded strange to her ears, a reminder that human speech was supposed to be a dialogue, not a monologue. "I've been looking for you." "For me?" Mireille took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. "How do you know about me?" "Because you're leaving traces," Casper said. He gestured to the coffee shop around them. "Footprints. Disturbed dust. Open doors. You're the only person I've found who's still active. Still living in real time." He paused, studying her face. "You've noticed the clocks, haven't you? All stopped at 3:47. The fact that he knew this detail, this specific, impossible detail, made something in Mireille's chest tighten. "What happened?" she asked. "What happened to the world?" Before Casper could answer, the infected from the back room burst through the door. They'd been activated by the sound of voices, and they moved with that terrible silent speed toward Casper. But he didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he pulled out a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a remote control, and pressed a button. The infected stopped mid-stride, freezing as if someone had pressed pause on their existence. "We need to talk," Casper said, returning his attention to Mireille. "But not here. I have a safe place. Somewhere the infected can't reach. Somewhere I can explain what really happened at 3:47 p.m. on the day the world stopped." He extended his hand toward her. "Will you come with me?" Mireille looked at his offered hand, at the frozen infected mere feet away, at this impossible man with his impossible device. Every instinct she developed over the past 6 months screamed at her not to trust anyone, to survive alone, to keep moving. But those same 6 months had been the loneliest of her life. And he had answers. He knew about the clocks. She reached out and took his hand. Casper's safe place turned out to be an underground parking garage 3 blocks away. He led Mireille down a concrete ramp that descended into darkness, and she noticed that he moved with absolute confidence, never checking for infected, never pausing to listen. The small device remained in his other hand, his thumb resting on its button like a gunslinger ready to draw. "How does that work?" Mireille asked, nodding toward the device. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls, her voice, only hers. Casper's footsteps were as silent as the infected's. He glanced back at her, and in the dimness, she caught something in his expression. Guilt, maybe. Or sorrow. "It's complicated," he said, which wasn't an answer at all. The garage opened into a wider space, and Mireille saw that Casper had transformed it into a kind of bunker. There were camping lanterns arranged in a circle, casting warm light across sleeping bags, stacked supplies, and, most strikingly, a wall covered entirely in photographs and notes connected by red string. It looked like something from a detective movie, a conspiracy theorist's fever dream made manifest. "I know how this looks," Casper said, following her gaze. "But I've been documenting everything. Trying to understand the mechanics of what happened." Mireille moved closer to the wall. The photographs showed various locations around the city, all with infected frozen in different positions. Times and dates were scribbled beneath each image. But what caught her attention were the notes in the center of the web: Chronos Project, Temporal Anchor, Neural Degradation, and most prominently, Patient Zero, Mireille Thorne. Her own name. She spun to face Casper, her hand going to her knife again. "What is this? What are you talking about?" Casper set the device down on a nearby table, a gesture of peace. "Your name is Mireille Thorne. You're 32 years old. You worked as a theoretical physicist at the Meridian Research Institute. Does any of that sound familiar?" It didn't. Mireille's earliest clear memory was waking up in an apartment 6 months ago, the world already silent, the infected already hunting. She'd found an ID card that identified her as Mireille Thorne, but it had felt like reading a stranger's name. "I don't remember any of that." "I know," Casper said gently. "The temporal anchor erased those memories. It had to maintain the stability of your consciousness within the time dilation field." He moved to the wall and pulled down a photograph. It showed Mireille in a white lab coat, standing beside massive equipment that looked like something from a science fiction film. She was smiling. She looked happy. "That's not me," Mireille said, but her voice wavered. "It is. You were the lead researcher on the Chronos Project. We were trying to create localized temporal fields, small pockets where time could be slowed or accelerated. The applications were supposed to be revolutionary. Medical procedures that needed more time. Disaster response where minutes could be stretched into hours." Casper's expression darkened. But something went wrong during the final test. The field didn't stay localized. It expanded across the entire city, then the region, then, we think, the whole world. Mireille's mind reeled. "That's impossible. You can't just stop time." "We didn't stop it. We slowed it to an almost infinite degree for everyone except you. You were at the center of the field, protected by the anchor apparatus. For everyone else, the past 6 months have been a fraction of a second. They're not frozen, they're moving so slowly that they appear motionless to you." Casper pulled down another image, this one showing a complex mathematical equation. The infection came after. People's neural systems couldn't handle the temporal stress. Their higher brain functions degraded, leaving only base instincts. Hunger. Aggression. The need to hunt. Then why are they moving normally when they chase me? Proximity effect. When someone from inside the anchor's influence comes near them, it creates a temporary synchronization. They speed up to match your time frame. But only while you're in range. Casper's voice dropped lower. "Mireille, you're the only person experiencing time normally because you're generating the field. You're the anchor. And I'm connected to you through the device I carry. It's a secondary anchor, keyed to your temporal signature. That's why I can move and speak normally when I'm near you." Mireille sat down heavily on one of the sleeping bags. This was too much. Too impossible. If all of this is true, why don't I remember? The anchor required a sacrifice. To maintain your consciousness in accelerated time while everything else slowed down, it had to burn through your memories as fuel. Starting with the most recent and working backward. You've lost everything from the day of the incident onward, plus probably several years before that. Casper knelt beside her. I worked with you. We were colleagues. Friends. I've been searching for you for months, from my perspective, trying to find a way to fix this. Can it be fixed? The silence that followed was answer enough. Mireille didn't sleep that night. She sat beside the lanterns, reading through the documentation Casper had compiled, trying to recognize herself in the woman in the photographs. Dr. Mireille Thorne, theoretical physicist, winner of the Carmichael Prize for Innovative Research in Temporal Mechanics. She looked at her own face smiling beside people whose names meant nothing to her, colleagues, apparently. Friends. A life completely erased. Casper had given her space, retreating to the far side of the garage to sleep, but she could feel his presence like a weight. He knew her. Or he knew who she used to be, which wasn't the same thing at all. Tell me about before, she said finally, breaking the silence. Casper stirred, not quite asleep. What do you want to know? Everything. Who was I? Casper sat up, rubbing his eyes. In the lantern light, he looked older than she'd first thought, worn down by whatever he'd experienced in the months since the world stopped. You were brilliant. Obsessive. When you got hold of an idea, you'd work on it for days without rest. The Chronos project was your passion. You believed it could change everything. He smiled slightly. You were also kind. You remembered everyone's birthdays. You brought coffee to the night shift researchers. You cared about people. And you? What were you to me? I was the project engineer. I built the equipment you designed. We worked closely together for 3 years. Casper's expression was difficult to read. We were friends. Good friends. Something in the way he said it made Mireille suspect there was more to the story, but she didn't push. If I'm the anchor generating this field, and it's burning through my memories, how much time do I have left? I don't know. The degradation isn't linear. Some memories might last longer than others. But eventually. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Eventually I'll become like them. The infected. Casper nodded slowly. That's my theory. When there's nothing left to burn, when your consciousness finally collapses under the temporal strain, you'll degrade into the same state. And when that happens, if you're the anchor holding the field together, I don't know what will happen to the rest of the world. Mireille stood and walked to the wall of documentation. She traced her fingers over the red string connecting various pieces of evidence, following the web back to the center, herself. Patient 0. The woman who broke time. You said you've been looking for a way to fix this. Have you found anything? There might be a way to collapse the field. To return time to its normal flow. Casper joined her at the wall, pointing to a cluster of notes marked field collapse scenarios. But it would require destroying the anchor. I die, and everyone else goes back to normal? Maybe. Or the sudden collapse could cause a catastrophic temporal rebound. Everyone could age 6 months in an instant, which would probably be fatal. Or the field could have already affected neural structures too severely, and everyone would remain infected even if time normalized. Casper's voice was heavy with frustration. I don't have enough data. I don't have access to the equipment we'd need to model the scenarios. I'm working blind. But it's possible that killing me could save everyone. Don't. Casper grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Don't start thinking like that. We don't know enough. And even if we did, I wouldn't let you. He released her abruptly, stepping back. There has to be another way. Mireille studied his face, seeing the desperation there. Why do you care so much? If we were just colleagues. Because I'm the one who turned on the machine, Casper said, and his voice broke on the words. The day of the incident, you weren't supposed to be in the chamber. There was a malfunction in one of the secondary systems, and you went in to fix it manually. I didn't know you were still inside when I initiated the test sequence. I'm the reason this happened. I'm the reason you lost your memories. I'm the reason the world stopped. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. I've been trying to fix my mistake for 6 months. I won't fix it by killing you. The raw emotion in his confession stirred something in Mireille. Not memory exactly, but a kind of recognition. A sense that this man's grief was genuine, that his guilt was a weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. She'd been alone too, in her own way. Maybe they could carry their burdens together. Then help me understand, she said quietly. Show me everything you know. If I'm going to lose more memories, if I'm going to eventually forget even this conversation, then I need to document everything while I still can. Maybe between the two of us, we can find an answer. Casper wiped his eyes and nodded. Okay. Yes. We'll figure this out together. Over the following days, Mireille and Casper established a routine. They ventured out into the silent city together, Casper's device protecting them both from the infected, while Mireille documented everything in her journal. She wrote down not just observations about the temporal field, but also personal details, things Casper told her about her past, descriptions of him, notes to her future self in case she forgot again. She learned that the city had a population of 1.2 million people before the incident. She learned that the Meridian Research Institute was located in the downtown district, now a maze of frozen infected. She learned that Casper had a sister named Isolde who worked as a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital, and that he hadn't been able to bring himself to go there and see if she was among the infected. We could go, Mireille suggested one evening as they sat in the parking garage, sorting through supplies. We could check. What if she's one of them? Casper's voice was hollow. What if I find her frozen in some hallway, her face twisted into that terrible expression they all wear? What if she's not? What if she found shelter? What if she's still okay? Mireille moved closer to him. You've been looking for me. Maybe we should look for her too. The next morning, they set out for St. Catherine's Hospital. The journey took them through parts of the city Mireille hadn't explored before. She saw frozen tableaus of normal life interrupted, a father pushing a child on a swing, caught in eternal suspension, a street musician with his guitar, his mouth open in a silent song, a couple holding hands, their fingers intertwined forever. It's beautiful in a horrible way, Mireille said softly. Like everyone's trapped in amber. They're not trapped, Casper reminded her. They're living their lives, just infinitely slowly. From their perspective, no time has passed at all. St. Catherine's Hospital was a sprawling complex of buildings connected by glass walkways. Casper led them to a side entrance, moving with the careful tension of someone preparing for the worst. Inside, the hospital was a nightmare landscape. Infected were everywhere, patients in gowns, doctors in scrubs, visitors caught in the act of fleeing. All frozen, all waiting. The emergency room, Casper said. She was working in the ER when it happened. They made their way through corridors lit by emergency lighting that still functioned, somehow. The hospital's backup generators must have kicked in when the power grid failed, and they'd been running ever since, maintaining the illusion that someone might still need their electricity. The emergency room was chaos frozen in time. Gurneys overturned. Medical equipment scattered across the floor. And in the center of it all, a nurse with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, holding a syringe, her face twisted in concentration as she tried to help a patient even as her own mind began to degrade. Isolde, Casper breathed. He approached slowly, reaching out as if to touch his sister's face, but stopping just short. She was trying to help someone. Even as the infection took her, she was trying to help. Mireille stood back, giving him space to grieve. She understood now why he'd avoided this place. There was a difference between knowing someone you loved was gone and seeing the evidence of it frozen before you. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling inadequate. Casper stood there for a long moment, his hand still extended toward his sister's frozen form. Then he lowered it and turned away. "We should go. There's nothing here for us." But as they left the emergency room, Mireille noticed something on a whiteboard mounted to the wall. It was a schedule, and someone had scrawled a note at the bottom in hurried handwriting: "If anyone finds this, bunker beneath radiology. Survivors gathering. Dr. Thaddeus Verne." "Casper, look at this." He studied the note, and something like hope flickered across his face. The timestamp. This was written after the incident began. After 3:47. There might be other survivors. Other people who can still move. Or it could be old. Or a trap. Or, Casper stopped himself. "But we have to check. Don't we?" The bunker beneath radiology was accessed through a service elevator that still had power. They descended 3 floors below the hospital's basement, emerging into a space that had clearly been designed as a fallout shelter from a previous era. The heavy door was sealed, but there was an intercom system beside it. Mireille pressed the button. Static crackled, and then a voice, a human voice, rough from disuse, spoke. "Who's there?" "My name is Mireille Thorne. I'm with Casper. We saw your message. Can you still move? Are you still in real time?" A long pause. Then, step back from the door. They did, and the heavy door swung open with a groan of metal. A man stood there, thin and haggard, with wire-rimmed glasses and a wild beard. Behind him, Mireille could see a larger space with more people, 6, 7, maybe 8 of them, all staring at the newcomers with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "I'm Thaddeus," the man said. "And yes, we're all still in real time. We've been trapped down here since the world ended. We thought we were the only ones left." His eyes focused on Mireille, and something in his expression changed. "But you're not just a survivor, are you? You're the anchor. You're the one who started all of this." The shelter beneath St. Catherine's Hospital had become a kind of underground village. Dr. Thaddeus Verne, a neurologist who'd been in the basement running tests when the temporal field activated, had gathered 7 other survivors in the months since the incident. There was Linnea, a laboratory technician with short red hair and nervous hands, Ozan, a security guard who'd been monitoring the camera feeds, Severin, a janitor who knew every hidden passage in the hospital, and 4 others, each with their own story of how they'd ended up in the shelter when time stopped. What they all had in common was their proximity to the hospital's MRI machines. Thaddeus theorized that the powerful electromagnetic fields had created a pocket of resistance to the temporal effect, allowing them to remain conscious while the rest of the world slowed to a crawl. "We've been surviving on the hospital supplies," Thaddeus explained, leading Mireille and Casper through the shelter. "But we've been trapped. Every time we venture upstairs, we risk activating the infected. We can't get far enough away to escape the hospital entirely." "Why haven't you tried?" Mireille asked. "Because some of us have family in here," Linnea said quietly. "We keep hoping we'll find a way to save them. To reverse what happened." All eyes turned to Mireille. She felt the weight of their expectation, their desperate hope that she, the person responsible for the catastrophe, might also be the person who could undo it. "I don't remember," she said, the words feeling like a confession. "I don't remember the project, or the incident, or how any of this works. My memories were burned away by the temporal anchor." "But you're the anchor," Thaddeus pressed. "You're generating the field. Surely there must be something." "She doesn't have answers," Casper cut in, his voice sharp with protectiveness. "We're trying to find a solution, but we don't know enough yet." Thaddeus studied Casper for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then perhaps we can help. I've been documenting the neurological effects of the temporal field on the infected. Linnea has been analyzing blood samples from before and after the incident. Between all of us, we have data. We have observations. Maybe together, we can piece together what we need to know. Over the following weeks, the shelter became a research hub. Mireille worked with Thaddeus to map the extent of the temporal field, venturing to the edges of the city with Casper's device to protect them. They discovered that the field extended roughly 50 miles in all directions from the Meridian Research Institute, creating a bubble of slowed time with Mireille at its center. Linnea's analysis revealed that the infected's neural degradation was progressive. The longer they remained in the slowed timeframe, the more their higher brain functions deteriorated. If the field continued indefinitely, eventually every human consciousness within its range would collapse completely. We're looking at total neurological death within another 6 months, Linnea reported during one of their evening meetings. Maybe less. The infection is accelerating. And what about the anchor? Severin asked, his eyes on Mireille. How long does she have? Casper answered before Mireille could. Irrelevant. We're not sacrificing her. Even if it means everyone else dies? Ozan challenged. Even if she's the only way to collapse the field and give people a chance. We don't know that killing the anchor will save anyone, Thaddeus interjected. The temporal rebound could be catastrophic. We need more data. But the data, when it came, wasn't encouraging. Mireille had begun to notice gaps in her memory, small things at first, like forgetting where she'd put her journal, or not remembering a conversation from the day before. Then larger gaps. She woke up one morning unable to remember Casper's name, and the panic in his eyes when she asked who he was haunted her even after the memory returned an hour later. It's accelerating, she told the group during their next meeting. The memory degradation. I can feel it happening faster now. Thaddeus removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a nervous habit. The anchor wasn't designed to run this long. The power requirements are burning through your neural substrate faster than your brain can compensate. Eventually, there won't be enough left to maintain consciousness. How long? Mireille asked. Weeks. Maybe days. The shelter fell silent. Mireille looked around at the faces of these people she'd come to know, some she'd remember, some she'd already begun to forget. They were all trapped in this nightmare together, prisoners of her invention, hostages to her dying mind. Then we need to make a decision, she said quietly. We need to decide what happens when I'm gone. Casper stood abruptly. No. We're not having this conversation. We have to, Mireille insisted. If I'm going to degrade anyway, if I'm going to become one of the infected, then maybe there's a way to use that. To control it. To collapse the field deliberately before my mind is completely gone. You're talking about killing yourself, Casper said, his voice breaking. I'm talking about ending this. About giving everyone else a chance. Mireille stood to face him. You said you've been trying to fix your mistake. Let me fix mine. It wasn't your mistake. Casper shouted, and the sound echoed through the shelter. It was mine. I turned on the machine. I'm the one who should. He stopped, breathing hard, and Mireille saw tears streaming down his face. She understood then. Understood the weight he'd been carrying, the guilt that had driven him to search for her through a silent world. And she understood something else, something she saw in his eyes that made her heart ache with a memory she couldn't quite grasp. We were more than colleagues, weren't we? She asked softly. Casper nodded, unable to speak. Tell me. While I can still remember. Casper told her everything. How they'd worked late nights together in the lab, fueled by coffee and shared passion for impossible science. How friendship had gradually become something deeper. How they'd been planning a life together beyond the Kronos project, a small house in the mountains, maybe, far from laboratories and equations. How he'd been preparing to propose when the accident happened. "I've been trying to get you back," he said, his voice raw. "Not Dr. Thorne. Not the physicist. Just Mireille. The woman I loved. But you're gone, aren't you? Even if your body survives, the person you were, the person we were together, she's already lost." Mireille felt tears on her own cheeks, mourning a love she couldn't remember, a future that had been erased. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They held each other in the shelter while the others gave them space, while time, what remained of it, passed in its strange, broken way. The decision, when it came, wasn't sudden. It was a slow consensus built over days of discussion, debate, and desperate hope that another solution might present itself. But Mireille's memory continued to deteriorate. She began writing notes to herself constantly, documenting every conversation immediately after it happened. She forgot Thaddeus's name. She forgot where she was. She had moments where she didn't recognize Casper at all. "We have to try," she said during one of her lucid moments. "We have to collapse the field before I'm completely gone. It's the only chance." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would return to the Meridian Research Institute, to the original anchor chamber. Casper had the technical knowledge to reverse the polarity of the field, to collapse it inward rather than letting it expand. The theory was that if they could do it while Mireille was still conscious, still able to serve as a stable anchor point, the field would collapse smoothly rather than catastrophically. The theory was that she would die, and the world would return to normal. The theory was all they had. They made the journey as a group, all 9 survivors moving through the silent city one last time. Mireille tried to memorize everything, the frozen faces, the stopped clocks, the terrible beautiful stillness of a world caught between seconds. But even as she tried to hold on to the images, she felt them slipping away, burned as fuel for a few more moments of consciousness. The Meridian Research Institute loomed before them, a glass and steel monument to humanity's hubris. The anchor chamber was in the basement, behind sealed doors that Casper opened with access codes he'd memorized. Inside, the equipment was exactly as they'd left it 6 months ago, or 6 months and a fraction of a second ago, depending on your reference frame. "I need to run diagnostics," Casper said, his voice mechanical, professional. Hiding behind the work like he'd always done when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "It'll take a few hours to prepare the collapse sequence." "I'll wait," Mireille said, though she wasn't sure if she'd remember why she was waiting by the time he finished. She wrote in her journal while the others helped Casper with the preparations. She wrote about the shelter, about the survivors, about the silent war that had raged for half a year in a city where time stood still. She wrote about Casper, about a love she couldn't remember but could feel in the aching absence where those memories should have been. On the last page, she wrote, "My name is Mireille Thorne. I broke the world. I'm trying to fix it. If you're reading this, I hope I succeeded. I hope time is moving again. I hope everyone got to finish their frozen moments, the father and child on the swing, the musician's song, the couple holding hands. I hope they didn't even notice the pause. I hope life goes on." "We're ready," Casper said finally. His eyes were red, but his hands were steady. "You need to be in the chamber. Connected to the anchor apparatus. When I activate the collapse sequence, it'll be quick." Mireille stood and walked to the chamber, a circular room lined with strange equipment, with a chair at its center. She sat down, let Casper attach the neural interface to her temples. The metal was cold against her skin. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. I am too." Casper knelt beside her chair. "I'm going to try to remember you. The real you. Not just what I've lost, but everything. Every moment. Every conversation. I'll carry those memories since you can't. That's a heavy burden. I deserve it. And besides..." He managed a broken smile. "They're good memories. Most of them. We were happy. I wish I could remember. Maybe you will. After. Maybe when the field collapses, when time returns to normal, maybe all those memories will come flooding back. He didn't sound like he believed it, but he said it anyway, a final kindness. Mireille reached out and took his hand. Thank you. For looking for me. For not giving up. I'll never give up on you. Casper stood and walked to the control panel. The other survivors watched from beyond the chamber's glass walls, witnesses to the end of the world's long pause. Thaddeus had his hand over his heart. Linnea was crying. They all understood what this moment meant. Initiating collapse sequence, Casper said, and his voice echoed in the chamber. Field reversal in 60 seconds. Mireille closed her eyes. She tried to think of something profound, something meaningful to carry into whatever came next. But her mind was fragmenting, memories dissolving like smoke. She couldn't remember where she was. Couldn't remember why she was afraid. Couldn't remember. 30 seconds. A man's voice. Someone she knew. Someone important. 15 seconds. Her name was. I love you, the voice said, breaking. I'll always love you. The world collapsed inward. Time rushed back like a tsunami. Every frozen moment unstuck at once, 6 months compressed into an instant. Clocks started ticking. Hearts beat. Lungs drew breath. The silent world erupted into sound. And in the anchor chamber of the Meridian Research Institute, Dr. Mireille Thorne opened her eyes one last time, smiled at a man whose face she couldn't quite place, and whispered, I'm sorry I don't remember. But I think I loved you too. Then time took her, gently, finally, and the war that had raged in silence came to an end. Casper stood in the cemetery 6 months later, looking at a headstone that read, Dr. Mireille Thorne. Brilliant scientist. Beloved friend. She fixed what was broken. Around him, the world moved in its normal, noisy, chaotic way. People had woken from the temporal field with no memory of the lost 6 months, their lives resuming as if no time had passed at all. The infected had returned to themselves, confused but alive, their neural degradation reversed by the field collapse. But Casper remembered. He remembered all of it. The silent world. The frozen clocks. The woman who'd forgotten everything except how to be brave. He visited her grave every week, bringing flowers, telling her about his life, about the world she'd saved. They're talking about giving you a medal, he said to the headstone. A memorial. They want to remember you as a hero. He paused. But I remember you as Mireille. Just Mireille. The woman who brought me coffee during late-night research sessions. The woman who laughed at terrible jokes. The woman I loved. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, a sound that had once been absent from the world. Casper listened to it, grateful for noise, for movement, for time's relentless forward march. He placed the flowers on her grave and walked away, carrying her memories like precious cargo, the only person left who remembered when time stood still and a silent war began. The only one who would never forget what she'd sacrificed. The only one who knew that in the end, she'd won. But the victory tasted like ashes, and the saved world felt terribly empty without her in it.